Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Breaking the Cycle, Saying No to Female Genital Mutilation and Cutting. We're honored to have you here, and as we bring together parents and caregivers who are dedicated to ending FGMC. Before we begin today, I'd like to share some important reminders that this webinar is being recorded to serve as a resource for anti-FGMC advocates and folks belonging to communities where FGMC is practiced or occurs. Closed captioning is also available. Our goal today is to create a safe space for our speakers and attendees to exchange experiences, foster empathy, and strengthen our networks. The purpose of today's webinar is to provide insight in the approaches and means of individuals choosing to say no to FGMC. Additionally, this webinar seeks to offer community-based engagement and support of individuals choosing to act against FGMC, citing their reasons for empowering themselves and others to advocate against a cultural norm. We hope to provide a platform to those choosing to speak out against FGMC practices to prevent it from continuing on to later generations, both within their own families and within their own communities. Please be advised that today's webinar will involve discussions on female genital cutting, which might include personal testimonies and discussions that could be triggering or deeply emotional for some participants. These conversations are important for understanding the complexities of FGC and the activism against it, but we also recognize that they can also be challenging to hear. Thank you all for being here and participating in this discussion. Priya, before I hand it over to you, a quick introduction. I am Saman and I'm one of the moderators today. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator at SEO, and my role involves building relationships, raising awareness, and mobilizing support around SEO's mission to end FGMC through community awareness, storytelling, and policy and advocacy initiatives. Priya, I'll hand it over to you to go over the agenda for us today and also introduce yourself, please.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Priya. I'm the Programs and Events Intern at SIO, and I'm going to be co-moderating today's discussion with Saman. So feel free to continue introducing yourselves in the chat box. We have a few speakers with us today that I'm going to introduce you to, and then we're going to get to know more about during the panel, some of whom are actually alumni of SIO's Voices to End the FGMC program. We're also going to be presenting the stories that they created during the Voices workshop, just to shed some light on what activism can look like and their individual motivations as well. And then afterwards, we're going to jump into our panel discussion with an opportunity for a Q&A from the audience. So please feel free to share any questions that you might have throughout our discussion, and then we're going to keep track of them. We're going to try to get as many out as we can before today's time runs out. So, and then finally, we're going to wrap up with some closing items and then share some resources that you might find interesting that are related to youth voices in addressing FGMC.
Thanks, Priya. All right, so a little bit about SEO. SEO formed in 2015 as an advocacy collective of South Asian and other survivors of female genital cutting, also known as female genital mutilation, to address the lack of acknowledgement of FGC as gender-based violence and child abuse impacting US women. SEO empowers underrepresented communities to advocate for their inclusion within FGC discourse and support them to create systemic change to end this centuries-long practice. SEO utilizes collaborative grassroots campaigns and storytelling techniques to train communities to lead this change. We also partner with frontline workers, that is healthcare providers, and create culturally sensitive systems of care for survivors and with the government to address policy level change. Let's do a quick introduction of our panelists today.
So today we're going to be joined by three wonderful panelists, activists, and advocates who will bring their experiences as parents and caregivers in preventing the cycle of FGC from continuing in their families and communities. So please join us in welcoming Marian Abdikadir, Mohammed Chapalwala, and Isatu Jang to this discussion. A little bit about our speakers. Marian is a human rights defender who uses her social media platforms for advocacy. She has worked at the grassroots and national policy levels to combat gender-based violence in Kenya. Mohammed is a convener of programs on socio-ecological and socio-cultural issues at the Samvana Institute for a decade now. He is a practitioner of the theater of the oppressed and works for social change through civil society engagement. And Isatu is a distinguished feminist leader, community organizer, and women's rights activist with over 13 years of experience advocating against FGMC and other forms of gender-based violence. You can learn more about our speakers via the link that is going to be sent in the chat.
Thanks, Priya. All right, so we'll begin our discussion today by watching Marianne's story called The Verbal Cut that she created in the Voices to End FGMC workshop led by Story Center in collaboration with SAO. A bit about the Voices to End FGMC program. It's a critical mass of storytellers and activists who join together from across the globe to share and heal from female genital mutilation and cutting, connect and grow as leaders, and they create short videos calling for an end to this harmful practice. Two of our speakers today, Marianne and Isatu, are both alumni of this program. Before we watch this video, a little bit about the video, we'll see how Marianne navigates the societal pressures around her in order to prevent her daughter from undergoing FGMC. And let's watch it together.
The day my friend told me she was not cut, I was so shocked. I was 19, she was 21. I told her that because she had not been cut, her prayers and fasting were not accepted in our faith. This is what people in the community had said to me. I also started looking at my friend with new eyes. We were told the girl who was not cut would become loose and run madly after men. We were told the organs of the genitalia grow long, making the girl walk with legs wide apart to avoid her thighs rubbing her elongated clitoris, and that she would smell bad. I often pretended to be tying my shoes so I could watch and see if she did walk that way. But there was no sign of this. She was not smelly either. 14 years later, I got the correct information. Female genital mutilation in all its types has no basis in Islam. I was liberated from the lie that it is a requirement. I decided to say no to FGMC. I took a position at a reproductive health organization to end FGM. When I was blessed with a daughter of my own, I knew she was a gift for the work I was doing to end this cutting. But I was not prepared for the challenges. Many relatives told my daughter, "You are going to smell. Snakes will grow down there if you're not cut." I got tired telling them to back off and send them packing out of my house. I felt like everything I told my daughter about how I would protect her would be overtaken by what others said about her not being cut. With all of this, she was even growing to hate her body. It hurt me to see her terrified eyes. I ended up leaving Kenya and moving to Canada to protect her. I may have saved my daughter from the physical pain of FGMCA, but I could not save her from the hateful words of those who still believe in this practice. I could not save her from the verbal cut.
Thank you, Marianne, for allowing us to share your story with us. If folks have comments and would like to share their responses to the video, we are welcome to do so in the chat. Let's watch Isatu's video next, who shares with us a deeply personal story about her daughter who was taken away to be cut in her absence. In her story, Isatu expresses her anger at her mother's failure to keep the child safe and her regret at not having been able to protect her. Her story is titled Protection. Let's watch the video together. I can't see the video being played.
Ma
at the
foye de,
moment.
man sarela de. Katu ngalan ko dinga foye ta. Ma foye de, man sarela de. Katu ngalan ko dinga foye ta sonna. These were the words of my cousin. And this is a story I have never shared with people, not even those close to me, because I feel ashamed. My older daughter was subjected to FGMC when I wasn't home to protect her. I was pregnant with her when I was just a child myself. In the Gambia, it is very common for relatives to snatch your daughter from you and cut her without your consent. I was in 10th grade when it happened. When I came home from school, my sister told me, Kari called Jannat akalafta diamuleyal. When I called her back, she said, Nyedingo samba nyaka tole, bari tanouta na masoto. Hey, afele jamfaba fea kanne. Tanouta na tala yamwe, kana jakal ku soto. Tears were rolling down my cheeks, and I didn't know how to respond. I asked my mom, mune atine mandingo tanka. Mune atine sonda yandingo samba nyaka to. And you telen lahidi ko bandingo tanka lale. Almanya naka wokenna. My mom said, ndamon ku noje ko anatala doraya chikaya samba. Ndamon ku kula noje. Nga katala purka tanka bari mon ku noje. I carried her for 9 months and I almost died giving birth. It was so unfair for someone to subject her to this heinous crime. To this day, it still hurts. My heart is still broken. I went through it when I was 6 months old, and I still live with its scar. I didn't want it done to my daughter. Here I am, protecting other girls, but I couldn't protect her. I have told my daughter from a young age about the realities of FGMC. We often talk about women's rights issues, and she has forgiven me, but I have not been able to heal. I have brought her on board into the movement to end FGMC. She says, I know it wasn't your fault that I was caught, but I'm going to make sure this stops with me. Together we are helping to support and save those at risk. She is healing, but for me, the wound is still here.
I think you're muted, Simone.
Thank you. All right. Thanks so much, Isatu, for sharing your story with us. If folks have responses, they're welcome to share them in the chat. And let's discuss a little bit more about the video in our panel discussion next. So our first question today is really open to all the panelists here. And Marianne, I have you as the first panelist on my screen, so I guess I'll start with you. If you can tell us a little bit more about yourself and your connection to FGMC and the work that you do.
Thank you very much, Saman. I would like to take a few minutes and come back. Let me take a few minutes. Let me give the space to someone else, please.
That's completely okay. It's completely okay. I understand. Isatu, did you feel comfortable? Are you comfortable taking this question first?
Excuse me. Hi everyone. Yeah. Thank you, Saman. Thank you, everyone.
as introduced, my name is Aissatou Jeng. I am from the Gambia, born and raised. As you heard in the video, I have been cut when I was 6 months old. I wasn't aware that I was cut while growing up. The Gambia, FGMC is highly prevalent in the Gambia, over 70% prevalence rate in the Gambia. And it is practiced all over the Gambia and among all ethnic groups in the Gambia. My mom is from an ethnic group, the Mandinka ethnic group, that has the highest prevalence rate of FGMC. And as a result, I couldn't escape the practice. It used to be highly celebrated, colorfully. Girls used to be taken to the bush, and caught from infancy up to puberty, and normally more than 300 girls in those days used to be taken to the bush and cut together. And after that, there used to be a huge colorful celebration with a lot of food, dancing and so on. So I used to attend those celebrations when I was young, when I was like between the ages of 3, 4, 5, until when I think this particular event happened when I was about 6 years old, when I was like in kindergarten, my last year of kindergarten. And my mom took me to a celebration now, and it was so good. And I was like, Mom, when am I also going to be celebrated like this? And she was like, you already went through this. You were cut when you were 6 months old. I was like, oh, okay, so I'm never gonna have a celebration like this. Then I didn't know what FGMC is. I just thought it's just food, drinks, and so on. And yeah, so, but I am a very curious, I have been curious since when I was a child. So, but luckily for me, I have an auntie and someone that is my namesake who has been involved in the movement and the fight against FGMC all her life. And we were very close. If you talk about FGMC, she's going to be the first name mentioned. Her name is Dr. Aissatou Toure. And she's my auntie, and she's my namesake, like I'm named after her. So so I used to go to her house a lot during summer vacations and other vacations, summer breaks. So she was the first person that introduced me to FGMC conversation. One time at her house, he called me and asked me, do I know what FGMC is? Because she has always been against FGMC. She made sure her daughters never went through the practice. And like Marian, I used to look at them in another way, like, because I was told if you're not, like as Mariam narrated in her story, like all the myths surrounding FGMC. So that stuck with me. So I used to look at her children, like, with those kind of odd eyes. Then I didn't know what FGMC is. So she was the first person to educate me about FGMC at that young age. And I started questioning my mom. The first day I opened my mouth and asked and mentioned the word FGMC in our native language, my mom was bitter, was angry, because it used to be a taboo topic. No one should talk about FGMC. Calling the name itself is a taboo, mentioning it. So she was so angry with me because it has to do with the external female genitalia, so you shouldn't mention it. It's sacred. So, and she was like, who told you this? You're not supposed to mention this. But then I knew she was uncomfortable. We didn't talk about it for a long time. But my dad auntie continued engaging, Dr. Toure continued engaging me on the issue. And then that's how I started getting involved and started building interest. And I was, in my I was a teenager at that time. So I started talking about, I started researching. I started doing my own findings about FGMC, and I started attending workshops and trainings. And that's how I became involved about FGMC. And, first what I did is I'd make sure I become knowledgeable about the practice, because I knew I can only defend myself, or I can only talk against the practice if I know what the practice is, the myths, the complications. And also FGMC is misconstrued, or is a myth that it is it is an Islamic obligation in the Gambia. Majority of the people that practice FGMC in the Gambia said it is a religious obligation. As Muslims, we should do it. That's the main reason why people practice FGMC in the Gambia. So I made sure I built my knowledge around the issue of FGMC and Islam, so that I'll be able to raise awareness and engage in constructive constructive conversations about the issues. So yeah, so that's how I became involved about FGMC. Then I started talking about it, and this has, so I would say I've been involved on the issue in the movement against FGMC since when I was a teenager, professionally like over 13 years ago, but I knew myself to be talking about FGMC all my life. And this is the work that I've been doing back home in the Gambia for the past 13 years. And this is the same work that I continue to do here in the US with the US and FGMC network currently. So yeah, this is how I became involved with FGMC. Yeah.
Thanks, Isatou. I guess, Marianne, we can ask you the same question.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining and for listening. Thank you so much, Isatou, for taking us through that. I was cut when I was 6 years old, so I'm very aware of what happened to me. I still recall the sound of that razor, and there's a poem, I consider it my gift to humanity. It's called The Cut, and it's on the internet. If you just Google The Cut, my name, it will come up. That was the first time I was putting down my story, but it didn't come easy, because as I said in the story, I was 19 when I first had another Muslim young woman who told me she was not cut, and that was so shocking to me at that time, because I was brought up knowing this was an Islamic requirement, and I wondered how she was a Muslim yet not cut, and she wondered how I was a Muslim yet I was cut. So both of us were using the same parameter, but really giving it different meanings. And that was the day a doubt was planted in my head, wondering who was on the right between this friend of mine and myself. And it did not come easy. It was almost a decade plus, I think 14 years is when I began to get the question. So first time was when I finished university and Beijing happened. I came across, I completed campus. I was way out of Nairobi. I'm originally from Kenya, so I was way out of Nairobi. And when I volunteered for an organization in Nairobi, the first day I went into their office, I saw a write-up. Beijing was big. We used to see it in the news. There was no Google or anything. And so any information about Beijing was very interesting. As a young woman who was coming up and interested in a lot of women's movements and advocacy, that was really so dear to my heart. So I see this write-up. It said presentation by the executive director of the organization I was volunteering for, and a presentation at the Beijing conference. And I open, and there's the world map with the Muslim countries mapped out. And this one was presenting that majority of the Muslims do not cut. It was such a shock for me to see that in Saudi Arabia, there was no FGM. And at a personal level, that was a turning point for me. I was like, this is where it ends. But I still had that question of why is the link there? And then when I went home and I tried to save my nieces, I could not, because everybody was asking me, well, what about the optional bit? It's optional. You can do it, you can leave it. We want to do it because it's optional. I had no answer really to give, and I'll go back to its impact, its issues, its problems, what we were all feeling. And people will be like, yeah, that's part of undergoing this practice. That's part of being a woman. As a woman, you will face pain in your life. So there was no really crossing over from this bit of linking FGM with Islam? And that question stayed with me. Sometimes I'm just walking on the road and FGM comes to my head and I'll be like, oh my God, like, what can I do about it? I need to do something about FGM. And I was lucky. I got a position with an organization, and I was going to work among my people. And I remember in the interview, I was asked, how are you going to do community entry in, because there was this huge gathering of Muslim scholars and they said FGM was not a priority in that region. And we have water issues, we have health issues, we have food issues. So FGM was not a priority. How can we engage this community? And I said the program needs to be given an Islamic face. And if you look in, online, there is religious-oriented approach to addressing FGM among the Somali community. That was like just a summary of the kind of blueprint we were using. This was a time when we did not even have strategies on social norms change. I'm talking about 2006, where we were at that time, we didn't have those strategies. And then, so I told them I'll need Muslim scholars who don't come from the Somali community to be able to help me really be engaging community. So that was the first beginning. I felt so lucky to be working among my people, to be able to delink this practice from Islam, because it has no basis in Islam. It actually goes against the teachings of Islam and the sanctity of the human body, on the different rights that women and girls are given. So that was the beginning of really engaging. And I worked on the grassroots and I worked at the national policy level. I'm so grateful that we were able to work towards getting a law, a comprehensive law in FGM in Kenya, on FGM in Kenya. And so I would say this is the longest program I've always worked on. I trained on social norms change and its approach and a strategy that we plowed back into our work on FGM. I have done research. I have handled community engagements. I have handled family engagements. I would say the hardest people for me have been my family. And at the moment, I came to Canada as a student. I did a second master's in anthropology. And my research paper was actually looking at medicalization of FGM and from a child rights perspective. And right now, what I do basically is this kind of work when I'm called for webinars, using my social media to talk about it. And it is a lifetime calling for me, because FGM shares a lifetime with me. It's a lifetime calling for me. My pain propels me towards always wanting to save that next girl. If I can do something, if I can put my voice out there, if I can share my story, and if it helps at least even one girl, that for me is victory enough. So this is how I got engaged and involved, and I'm still involved in the work against FGMC and working towards ending female genital mutilation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne and Isa, too. Some extraordinary testimonies about how you really transformed your pain into, utilized it for advocacy and to, save future generations and future girls. I guess, Mohammed, we can shift it over to you. And if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to FGMC and the work that you do, and how do you find yourself here?
Thank you, Saman. Thank you, Istu and Marianne, for sharing such powerful stories. You're really, really inspiring. And thank you, everyone, for joining in. My name is Mohammed Chappalwala, and I come from India. And I was born and brought up in a cosmopolitan city, which, if you think economically and as well as in terms of education levels, exposure to the world, is one of the most cosmopolitan cities and a financial capital of India. I come from a sect known as the Dawoodi Bohra sect, and this practice, FGC, is there in the community as well. So I just wanted to contrast, not to have any kind of hierarchy, but just to contrast what Isitu and Marian said in terms of their backgrounds and from where they come from. So even in such a community, This is practice. It's a type 1 or type 4 FGC that is practiced in the Daudi Bohra community. Is to also mention about celebrations and all. So one of the things that happens to little girls, is at the age of 7. And after that, there are celebrations. However, no one is talking about that this celebration is for doing this abhorrent act. It is not spoken about, but there is a celebration after doing FGC. So uh, again, both the speakers talked about how it is Islamic or not Islamic. But I feel that is a very cultural practice in this particular sect, and the community, or if you see India as a is not a Muslim dominated or Muslim majority country. It has many different religions, and we are one of the minorities. But even in the minorities, there are so many other sects who do not practice this. As Marian also mentioned about the world map. So communities who are living together within the same city, within the same country, there is only few communities who are practicing this FGC, not all the Muslim communities. So it's a very cultural practice, I believe, within the Bohra community, and there are 2 other communities who, in my knowledge, do that in India. Apart from that, the other Muslim world, the Islamic world, do not practice this. So I came to know about this at the age of 30. So I will share further how men in general are kept in the dark, and they are not told anything about this. Even in some cases, the young girls do not know what has happened to them. And after many, many years, parents or other people say that, okay, you have been cut and this happened to you. So we'll talk about that. And my role in this webinar is to also bring out how men can kind of talk about FGC, and especially in our community where it is so much hidden from the gaze. So since the last 10 years, I have been speaking about FGC in public forums and on social media. I also speak about, and I'm part of this Public Policy and Politics Institute, where we do workshops on social justice and human rights, particularly on gender, understanding patriarchy, sexuality, masculinity in the Indian context, as well as talking about caste-based discrimination in the Indian subcontinent. I am a theater of the oppressed practitioner, so I do get a chance to interact with a lot of people throughout the year. And I've been associated with SAIO since 2016, and have been part of the Bhaiyo volunteering program, which is run by SAIO. So I've been talking about FGC and spreading the word about its harms and why we should discontinue this practice. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Mohammed. I'm really excited to hear a little bit more from you later on about like the importance of male engagement in anti-FGMC advocacy. But for now, let's turn to Marian and Isa too. So you both touch on this point in your videos that we watched, and I wanted to ask if you both could expand on it and speak more to the main pressures that families and parents face when deciding whether or not to have their child undergo FGMC. If you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, okay. I think I can go. Thank you very much. When FGM is a social norm in most of our communities, it's something that is so normal for everyone, and the abnormal is to actually say no to it or not to do it. So in that case, then obviously that just comes with a lot of pressures. Personally, for me, everybody knew right from my home, my family, and outside, I was an advocate against FGMC, and they have always like teased me and made like fun of how comes, like all your education has just come down to talking about this little small, and they'll do this cultural, which means small, little, insignificant, and they'll mention kintir, like kintiris clitoris. So how comes all your education has just come to talking this shameful thing? But then when I had my daughter now, as I shared in the story, I was really scared for her. And it was a time in my life when I was really scared. And I could see all the name calling and everything. But then I was like literally scared that my daughter could be cut behind my back. Just like Isatu's community, in my community, you can just include a neighbor's daughter or a relative or whoever. You don't need any permission. I used to live with my cousin sister, and that's why I was cut. She did not need to ask for anybody's permission to cut me. But I was living with her. But even if I was not living with her, just the fact that maybe she would be cutting her daughters if I was nearby, you'll just be cut by a neighbor, relative, anybody. So I was just afraid because that was the norm. And then the last stroke was when my mom actually asked me one day, what would you do if your daughter was cut? And I was shocked and I asked her, Mom, are you planning to cut my daughter? She was like, no. Not in my wildest dreams. I will not cut her, but I'm just asking, what will you do? At that time in Kenya, we had the law in place. So I said, when I do nothing, I will use the law and prosecute the person. But knowing how bad this thing is, knowing how life-threatening it is, knowing how dangerous this is, knowing how much my daughter's life would have been affected, I don't know if I'll even run berserk and just kill that person. Deep inside, I was, of course, shaken and saying, what will I do, Mom, if it is you? What will I do? I never ever wanted to actually be in that sport. So that's when I decided I was coming for a second master's and coming to Canada. And I know that's such a privileged thing for me. Not many women have the space, the finances, and the freedom to make that kind of a decision and even get that opportunity. I'm very alive and I'm very humbled by the fact that I was so privileged to be able to do that. But I think one thing that we have really not been able to focus on, and which could be our next focus, is really understanding the worries, the fears of people who have decided they're not cutting their daughters. A master's degree holder back home, married to a professor, called me one time, and I'm picking on these two educational qualifications because I just want to show these were highly educated, it was a highly educated household. And this woman asked me, well, I know if this thing has no basis in Islam. I know it's not our culture. I know it's a bad thing. I'm just worried about when they say the organs are going to grow long. And the little anatomy that we all did in biology should have actually helped this person know that every human body part grows, but grows proportionate to where it has been. So, and you can imagine if that's her fear. What about this other woman who maybe is not literate, is not able to read, is not able to even discuss with the neighbor, is not able to even say, I have decided I'm not cutting my daughters. Was it actually easy for her to make that decision? And then what is the challenges? So I think it's something for all of us. I also think about the young girls. I think the true survivors are the young girls of women who have been cut and who come from communities where this practice is a norm. Because this subject always just springs up. It's so easy to bring it up, and it's so easy to demean women who are not cut in that kind of setup. So I don't know what their challenges would be, but I can only imagine if you're seated there and you're being demeaned, your genitalia is being demeaned, you're being body shamed for really not undergoing this horror. I was in a workshop one time in Mombasa, Kenya, and we were trying to, there has been a whole effort of delinking FGM from Islam. So we used to have occasional workshops and meetings with religious scholars. And this was a national gathering. And they kept talking about how the women who are not cut are. And all of them just myths coming from the social, cultural norms of really not understanding the women's bodies. And there were these two women from the coastal region of Kenya. They don't practice FGMC. They were seated there, and I could literally see how much these women wanted to shrink and hurry out of that room and bury themselves. So I took a note and wrote to them, and I told them, we have your backs, don't feel this is all a lie. Stand up and speak for the woman who's not cut. I can stand up and speak for the one who's cut. I can't stand up and speak for you because all these men know that I'm not cut because my story is out there. And one of them stood up and said, I just want to ask, we've gone for break, we've gone for lunch, we've been here the whole 2 days now. Who have I chased? Which man have I chased here? Just tell me. So, and he really spoke about how they have been demeaning them and insulting them and all that. So I think that just comes back to really trying to fit into their shoes and wanting to understand. But as a mother who really was shocked at that time in her life, I can only speak to the fact that I was really shaken and I was so afraid my daughter will be cut behind my back. I'm not afraid of that now. I'm always now concerned about the damage maybe those words might have left, and it's a continuing process for us. It's a journey we are on. We always keep talking about it and always keep debriefing about it. But I just want to throw out there that this could be an area, if there are students who are here, this could be area that could be studied. What are the young girls who have been saved going through? What are the mothers? What is their worries? What's their concern? What about the fathers? What about the young men who would be the future, maybe husbands of these women? So just, I think a general societal study that would be needed. That's my suggestion.
Agree. Thank you. Isatu, did you want to touch a little bit about the pressures that families and parents face when deciding that, you know, they don't want to go through with this for their children?
Sure. Thank you, Saman. Yeah, you know, this whole thing is taking me back to the time when I got that call from my cousin that my daughter was cut. And, you know, she was celebrating it. My daughter was cut in 2004 when I was still a minor myself, because as you all had in the video, that I had a child when I was 15, 16, and I went back to high school to, and I went to stay with my older sister when I got a call that my daughter is cut, because I had to leave my daughter with my mom when she was just 6 months, to go stay with my older sister to finish high school. So as I said earlier, my family knew my stand against FGMC, because I started talking against it since at a young age. But that time there was no law in the Gambia. The Gambia had a law. The Gambia banned FGMC in 2015. So there was no law to protect my daughter from FGMC at that time. But I thought my mom was going to protect her. But as Marian mentioned, I understand perfectly the pressure with all the myths and misconceptions surrounding FGMC, especially with regards to it being linked to Islam and the myth that the clitoris elongates and, you know, grows big and stuff like that, and the social norm, the social stigma. If you're not caught in those days, if you're not caught in the Gambia or your child is not caught, it's so hard to accommodate the pressure and stigma. I mean, living in a community that predominantly or that practice FGMC, like the whole community practice. So you are forced to cut your girls, your daughters or your grandkids. So it's very normal for a cousin just to grab your daughter without your permission, as Marian mentioned. So that's what happened. You know, as I mentioned, I almost died giving birth to my daughter, because I was a child myself, giving birth to a child. We all know how giving birth to a child, the complications and how hard it is. It's a matter of life and death. So for me to go all through that pain and just to get a call from a cousin that, you know what, we have taken your girl to FGMC, and I thought to myself, did she know what I went through giving birth to that child? And she knew perfectly well that I'm against FGM, but yet still she did it, and she was celebrating it. That's the norm in the Gambia. Any distant relative can grab your child, or even someone who you're not related to, just because the procedure is happening in your village. Anyone can grab your child, and that's how my daughter went through FGMC. Fast forward, yes, I was involved in the movement against FGMC in 2004, but then it was still sacred and a taboo shrouded in secrecy in those days. So very few people, especially young people, are bold, were bold enough to even mention the word FGM. I was among those few young people who had the audacity, to mention FGM. So people were not even taking me seriously in those days. Like, who are you? Just because, just because I was in high school then, but just because you're going to school, or they were not even listening to me, because I was child myself, and who am I to question a culture that has been ongoing for centuries? Who am I to stop? I cannot stop. For me, my voice, to them, my voice was so dormant or so little to say no to FGM. And so that's the case for most people. But fast forward, by the time I get my second daughter, this was in 2019. Country, the whole Gambia, knows who Aissatou Jang is and her involvement in the fight against FGM. My family knows. My mom is became my biggest supporter. Because we had a serious conversation around why my first daughter was cut, and my involvement became huge before I got my second daughter. So they knew. But even as we speak now, I fear for my two little girls, because they go to Gambia almost every summer vacation. And you all had what's happening in the Gambia since 2023. The effort to the proponents of FGM trying to overturn the law, and this has actually propelled, or has actually given a new face to FGM in advocacy in the Gambia, because so many people in the Gambia that abandoned FGM, because as Marian, I have walked the length and breadth of the Gambia educating people about FGM, and so many communities did public declarations and ceremonies to say no to FGM. And believe me that when I say most of those communities are gone back to FGM, because the Gambia is majority Islam, is an Islamic population. Over 95% of Gambians are Muslims, and majority of the women in the Gambia, even though we have majority women, but most of these women cannot read and write, or cannot read the Quran, or cannot interpret the Quran. So most of the interpreters of the religion or the Quran are men, and most of the supporters of FGM are men. And these are the very men that misinterpret the teachings of Islam to convince these women that FGM is a religious obligation, it's an Islamic obligation. So it becomes so hard on these women to, like, they're confused, they don't know what to believe, because they've been brainwashed by, some of these men, trying to, misinterpret the religious text to say FGM is a religious obligation. So now most of these communities are gone back to FGM, believe me. So the prevalence rate is still high in the Gambia. A lot of work has been done over the years. We've managed to convince so many people to say no to FGM, but it is disheartening and worrying to see most of those communities going back to the practice. So my daughters going for summer vacation to Gambia really frightens me, because they're at risk. Even some close family members still continue to practice FGM. And this used to be people who openly declare and said they are against the practice, and now they're going back to the practice. So as Marian mentioned, this is a social norm. I understand. So changing social norms takes a lot of time, especially a practice that has been ongoing for centuries. We only have to continue educating the people. The pressure is always there. Most women that I talk, that I have interactions with are against FGM. But because of social stigma, pressure, and all that it comes with, all the negativity that comes with it, the verbal cut, as Marian mentioned, is what is forcing most women to accept or cut their girls, but they do not want it. So even me, who has been in the fight, or who's been in the movement, the whole world knows my stance against FGM. I still have my daughters at risk. I fear for my daughters. And I know what those women are going through just to protect their girls from FGM. We just have to continue educating the people, raise awareness, and delink FGM from Islam, that it is not a religious obligation. And we must continue to do this in respect, because it's important to respect people who still continue to do the practice. We can advocate against this practice, but then we must respect those who want it continue by educating them. I used to in the Gambia, I used to be chased out of communities in educating people. There was a time one of the community members chased me with a cutlass. My life was on a daily, like I used to take a lot of risk in going to communities in those days. Now it's different, but with what is happening right now in trying to overturn the law, the activists on the ground face the same risk. So, well, for me, what kept me going was I knew, as Marian mentioned, even if I change one person to say no to FGMC, it's worth it. So that continues to be my motivation. And I never relent, even though there has been, so many threats on my life, and it's scary sometimes, but we continue. So yeah, the pressure is always there, but what we can do is continue educating the people, and hopefully one day this will become history.
Great, thanks so much, Isa too. I became a mother, just a little personal perspective to this at the age of 28. So, and my worldview completely changed. I had no idea what was going on around me. So I appreciate you prefacing your conversation with a bit about how you had your child at the age of 15, and I cannot imagine. So, all right. So Priya, I'll let you ask the question. I know you had some thoughts about, how does one work around cultural norms? So I'll let you ask the next question from all the panelists, if you will.
Yeah, I guess, should I go one by one or just ask everybody?
I guess we'll start with Mohammed.
Okay. So Mohammed, how do you go about working against the cultural norms and traditions to encourage people to say no?
So one of the things, as I mentioned, that because I can't talk to women and my job is to talk to men of the community, there are many questions. One of the first things that I have encountered while talking to men is that they are not even aware about it, that it's being practiced. The second thing, which is again in contrast to what Isatu said, that this practice in our community, there is some agency with the parents, that the parents decide, the mother and the parents' family decide when this procedure is to happen. It is not a community thing. It's not very open. So it is not some other relative or some other people who will do it. Parents still have some kind of agency around it. So generally in my discussions with the men is first to actually just inform that this exists. This has health impacts, this has psychological impacts, emotional impacts. So that is one of the first strategies that I have employed. The other thing which I do not try to do is to convince people on the validity of it being a religious or a cultural practice. Because once we get into the religious, at least in the cultural context that I am in, you can't win debates. When if someone says that it's religious, then we cannot convince them not to do it. Because we see it as more of a cultural practice in the community. One of the things that you have to remember, especially with the Dawoodi Bohra community in the Indian subcontinent context, is caste plays a very big role. Each and every person in the Indian subcontinent has a particular caste, and with caste comes caste endogamy and patriarchy. So my strategy has always been to talk about the harm. SAIO and many other groups, there are many, many resources of what FGMC exactly is. So the WHO documents have it very much detailed of what actually is being done to girls. Especially in the Dawoodi Bohra context, because we have at least we have some connection, some education, some vocabulary, some common ground on which we can talk. That has kind of really helped me in making people understand or see what are the impacts. And especially as you shared a couple of movies, I would also like to share The Pinch of Skin, which was made by Priya Goswami. That is one movie which I go to and encourage people to go and watch. That what are the women talking about? Don't believe in what I am trying to say, but the women are speaking up. They are talking about the psychological impacts. They are talking about their bodies. So we should give women voices a priority. So that has been generally my strategy.
Thank you for that answer. I guess for Marian, I will ask the same.
Yeah.
What advice would you, or how do you go about working against cultural norms and traditions to encourage people to say no?
Yeah, thank you very much. So in the Somali community, I've worked the longest in the Somali community, and I always like giving my examples from there because I come from that community, and many of my experiences are drawn from there. And also the fact that I worked the longest, I think I was very lucky to be able to work in the context that I totally understand. So Somali community is also majority Muslim, just like a community from the Gambia. And yes, I don't believe FGM is my culture even. I know it's a social norm that has been given a cultural identity, and people believe it's our culture. It was such a shock for me to realize not only that other Muslims are not cut, but even there are people who are non-Somali who actually cut. Like when I came into the arena and I realized out of the 40 plus communities in Kenya, 38 of them do have FGM as a norm. That was another shock that this thing is not just ours. And now we all know it happens in 92 countries in the world. So it's not a particular continent or particular peoples. But for the Somali community, just like in any other community, there are obviously narratives that hold this practice in place. And when you're working around social norms, you have to be able to water down those narratives. You have to be able to wash them away. You have to be able to give them alternative thinking. And that has been the concept of delinking FGM from Islam. They are majority Muslim, so even if they want to believe it is their cultural practice, in Islam the guidance is always we need to sieve our cultures. Anything that is against Islam, then is we don't go on with it. So that has been one of the mantras to go back to and teach them. But in terms of the delinking, we used to look at, is there any source, any justification? There was nothing in the Quran, but they give a narrative of, oh yeah, during Prophet Abraham's time, peace be upon him, Prophet Abraham was a man. Is there anything in the covenant that talks about the women in his life? No. So we always used to go back into all this so that, nobody has something to run to and hold on to. Like you need to question that and give them alternative thinking. And from the experience of working with those religious leaders at a personal level, yeah, people were changed and convinced, but collectively again, they would always just wanted to have that mob psychology of just wanting to please themselves in the community because so it was the issue of addressing the narratives around the clitoris growing long and rubbing on the thighs and making the woman or the girl get on heat and jump on the next man. We all know those are myths. So how do you talk about the anatomy? We always had a nurse or a medical doctor, someone who was experienced and knowledgeable enough on the human anatomy to be able to show them that every body part grows proportionately, but nothing except if you're sick. The ear doesn't grow longer than the head, except maybe if there's some sickness. The arm doesn't grow long to the ground. Yes, it has grown from the size it was when the child was born, but and just to help them understand how the body functions. So and then the whole issue of there are stories in the community. Oh, this happened. There was a time that this woman was not cut. And really, we have to show them empirical evidence of how much practice there is in the community where for them to be able to say one time, a long time ago, someone was not cut and there was this and that happened, because then they are demeaning the women who are not cut and making stories about them. So FGM has been with us all this time. But in terms of empirical evidence, again, to be able to address FGM, we all know it can thrive in that ignorance of thinking, well, everyone else is doing, if I don't do it, people will think, you know, I'm the odd one out. Again, we had to like have stories of people who have said no to FGM. My story was out there, and any other woman who was also willing to stand up and say, my daughters are not cut. And then we would also pick on particular prominent men from the community who went and married from the coastal region of Kenya. And in the coast, women are not cut. And so we used to tell them, well, you want to say your girls will not be cut if you don't cut them. But look at the men, so and so and so and so are marrying from this region. Their women are not cut. So we always had to go back to what are the elements of social norms, and then how do we begin to address those to be able to help somebody make a change? Because at a personal level, that's what made me change, really seeing that empirical evidence of a Muslim girl who was not cut. That was the first time that I put a question mark on this. And it's something that I still continue. I try and use some fun and humor and something interesting like music. But the music has meaning that I can link to FGM. If many of you follow me, but mostly that I will always talk about love and be loved. So it's all about love. Let's love ourselves. Let's love our girls. Let's love them so much and have their filter on, you know, like leave their clitoris on. Why are we hitting on this organ? So again, removing the shame from this organ, you know, like being able to say and name. Let's talk about the clitoris. What is it called in your language? In my language, it's the kintir. Can we say kintir without feeling an ouch around it, you know? And that's a norm. We can't begin wanting to save something we are not able to actually even mention. The other issue was the language, being aware of the language we are using. In my community, FGM is considered circumcision. If I say it, female circumcision in English, I know I will be making a wrong thing, you know, calling it a wrong name. FGM is not circumcision. It has nothing to do with circumcision. So I think the language, many of us fall into the trap where, for example, in my community, they want to use an Arabic term that stands for something that is an optional practice in Islam. I hate to use it, but for this one time, just to put in context, I will say they like to use sunnah. And if we write that in our RIP reports, if we write that in our trainings, if we refer to FGM with that name, we are legitimizing it as Islamic. If you legitimize something as Islamic, how do you then come back and say, let's stop it? So we need to be worried about the language. How do we define? What are the terminologies? How are we talking about this practice when we go to the communities? When I would go to the community, because in the community they'd say, we have Fir'auni, which is pharaonic or type 3, and then we have this other one, the mild one, the small cut, the Islamic cut. So I used to always say, okay, Fir'auni and Fijr, because how they'll define if that what they are calling the mild. We all know there's nothing mild about FGM, whichever type, but whatever they are considering mild, they'll say, we just cut a little bit in here, small little bit of the tip of what they don't want to mention, of course, of the clitoris. So I used to say, okay, fine, let's talk about Fir'auni and let's talk about Fijr. And everybody agrees pharaonic or type 3 is a bad practice. Nobody should be doing it. So we always used to come back to this type 1, where they consider it's mild and it is religious. And so the questions now begin. Is it religious? Does it have a basis? Does it actually have any harms? And we'll only have a medical doctor to help us to show all the harms that come from all the types of FGM, and the religious scholar who would link it from Islam. So I think it's a constant battle. It's something that is going on. You make steps forward, and then you always find like the person you talked to yesterday who was with you, and then they are not actually there. Just like what Isatu said, a sister of mine, she's 70 years old. I like picking on her example. I always thought she was the only ally I had in the family. I thought she was a woman who understood me, who understood what I was talking about, who was with me when I said this practice needs to end in its totality. And then one day she gives me a call. I was out in the field for 2 weeks. I just came back to Nairobi. I was coming out of the elevator to go to the office, and she gives me a call, and I pick her call, and she's like, "Oh, today we did the mild type of cut to so and so and so and so." These were her granddaughters. And I just sat down and broke down. That's the day I wrote the poem, The Cut. And it just made me feel so alone. So sometimes when I'm faced with these challenges, I go back to that point where I was so broken that day. But I picked myself up because I was like, even if I'm alone, I'm standing with the truth that FGMC is dangerous, it's life-threatening, it's harmful, it's inhuman, it needs to end. And I think that is still my mantra to this day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marianne. Real quick, Isatu, if you want to address that last question about
Yeah,
cultural norms,
I
and
just
we just want
want,
to be mindful of the time for a little bit. Just have we want to open up the
yeah.
conversation to the
Mhm.
audience if they have questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to quickly echo what Marianne was saying. About irrespective of the type, FGMC is harmful. I remember when I was in primary school, a woman, I think I was peeing and I was squatting. I s- she looked at my clitoris and said I wasn't cut, that I wasn't clean enough, like my FGMC wasn't properly done. She said, "You are not clean. They should take you back to the circumciser to cut you." I grabbed I closed my legs and then quickly grabbed my vagina. And to this day, until I grow old, I was so scared of that woman that she would take me back to the cutter. She said I went through type 1 and I wasn't clean enough. I wasn't like I didn't qualify to be an FGMC survivor. I think that's what she meant. So in the Gambia, when you talk about FGMC, so they don't want us to call it FGM. Like as Marianne, it's always considered female circumcision, and we all know it's different from male circumcision. So we have our native languages that we call FGMC. In my mother's tongue, we call it Nyaka. So they will say, we don't practice FGM in the Gambia. We only practice the Sunnah type, which is type 1. I went through type 1 FGMC, and I still live with a scar. My sexual life is ruined. It's affecting me on a daily basis. It's affecting my marriage. It's affecting my mental health and everything that comes with it. So irrespective, I just want to re-echo that, irrespective of the type, FGMC is harmful, and you live with the scar you live with the pain and the scar for the rest of your life. Few examples of what we did. I also make reference to the Gambia because I just moved to the US like 3 years ago. So most of my work has been done in the Gambia. In getting women or in getting people to say no to FGMC, not only women. What the most effective strategy we used is creating focus group discussions with people. What I realized in my advocacy working with communities is most of the time women are afraid to talk about their experience as survivors of GMC in the midst of men. So what we do is we make sure we don't usually bring them together. We make sure we have focus group, trainings or outreach with only women, men, religious leaders, community leaders, youth, because youth also, are not comfortable talking about bodily autonomy or, about their bodies in front of elderly people. So when we do that, we have a lot of, especially when we have focus group discussions or trainings with women alone, the survivors come forward to share their experience. And so we document survivor stories in case they're interested in documenting their stories. And we mobilize survivors. So we use storytelling techniques to have survivors come forward. So we have a lot of women share their stories, their experience of, their experience as survivors of FGMC. So that is actually powerful. So for me, particularly as a survivor, to make people comfortable in sharing their stories, I usually will be the first person to share my story as a survivor. And that gives other people or other women the courage to share their stories. And when we use the storytelling techniques, we have even men. Later on, when women are more comfortable talking about their bodies and their experiences, we bring them together. We mix these groups together. And we have women who used to be afraid in talking about their experience in front of men, now brave enough to talk about their experience as survivors. So when men hear women sharing their experiences, these has actually propelled or compelled some of these men to go back and research more about FGMC. And even religious leaders who were for FGMC had to go back. And we have some of these religious scholars come back to our trainings or outreaches and say, I used to think this is an FGMC obligation, an Islamic obligation rather, but with further research, I am convinced that it is not. So what we also do is have those, some of those religious scholars as allies against FGMC. So we use them as voices, especially men, because when men say no to FGMC, that's powerful, and coupled with being a religious leader. So we use these religious leaders, these who are men, to on our side to campaign or say no to FGMC. And that has actually, been very fruitful in our advocacy in the Gambia. So that's the technique we've been using. First, focus group discussion, like women's circles, youth circles, and then if they're comfortable sharing their stories, we bring them together and they share their stories, and we have more people, men, women, youth, come together most of the time to say no to FGMC. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Aisatu. I think that's a great segue into my question to Mohammed. What do you believe is the role that male engagement can play in supporting parents and caregivers and having conversations? And if you have had conversations about FGMC with community members who are parents, and did that help make them make the decision to not have their children undergo FGMC?
Yes. So one of the conversations, I can recollect one of the stories wherein there was a male person who did not want his daughters to be cut, but he was in the process of getting separated from the wife. So he was very unsure that how do I then kind of go ahead and ensure that my in-laws family and my wife do not go ahead and cut the daughters. So that was one of the experiences where I was able to talk to the person. I was able to share what are the resources, and as strong voices like Arifa, Istu, Marian over here, why don't you share all these resources and have her have a look at what are the impacts of FGMC on women? So that was one. Can you just repeat your other part of the question?
I'm curious to hear like what the role of male engagement is in supporting parents and caregivers. Like, how do you think that we can bring the concept of like male engagement in addressing anti-FGMC
Correct.
advocacy?
So in what Stu and Marian said, in terms of the cultural context, in each context it is different. Like for
Sure.
example, the clergy and people from the priestly class, they cannot be, I would say, brought in as allies in case of this particular community which I come from. So what we have to do is we have to lift this veil of ignorance from the men of the community, because they are completely kept in the dark. In many cases, not only in case of FGMC, but rather in terms of any of the women's issue, from puberty to menopause, men are completely in the dark. So I believe particularly for the Dawoodi Bohra community, when we talk about this issue as men and we engage men, there will be more light. They will come to know that such a practice exists. And I do believe that once people are able to openly talk about this, when men are openly talk about this, there will be more discussion. It's not as if this whole practice is done by the men forcing women. It is so ingrained in patriarchy that from the clergy, if there is an order, it is understood that this has to be done. I would like to use Gujarati, कि आ तो थावू ज જોઈએ. But why? So I think that is the reason we need, in particularly in this community, that we need more men to understand what is FGMC, how it impacts their partners, how it impacts their daughters. So that is one of the things that I am trying to do.
Great, thanks so much, Mohammed. I guess, Priya, I'll leave it up to you to ask one last question before we delve into question and answers from the audience, if they have any.
Yeah, so I just have one last question for all the speakers, and I think just to be mindful of the time, if we can all try to keep our responses to like a minute or less. But what advice would you give to parents facing pressures to have their children undergo FGMC? So I think we can start with Marian.
I would say go for it, even though it's challenging, even though it's a journey that can feel very lonely and very uncertain and make you very afraid. I think protecting the girls from this horror is the biggest gift any parent can do for their children. And if there's any parent out there who maybe doesn't know what to do, then really look into the communities and where they live and see what resources there are, what other social networks are there. Organizations that work in communities, linking up parents who have said no would be a very, very important social network that those who have said no would need. In terms of social norms change, again, that's a community they can look into. Instead of thinking everyone is doing, I'm left out, then they'll be like, no, but I know myself, and so on, so on, so on. So they need that kind of people to go back to. And so I think really being helped and being supported, but it's the greatest gift any parent can give to their daughters, however daunting, however ridiculed, however afraid you might be, however so many questions that might run in your head. Go for it, I'll say.
Thank you. Isatu, I asked the same question of you. What advice would you give parents?
Yeah, first of all, I'll say be firm on your decision not to cut your child. As Marian mentioned, it can be challenging, but just make sure you stand your ground and say no. But also you can only protect your child from FGMC when you're knowledgeable about the issue. So make sure you seek knowledge about the practice and know. I mean, like, be knowledgeable about the practice is important, because you don't just say I'm not gonna cut my girl, but you also use that knowledge to educate your communities, your families about the practice. And also use that knowledge to raise awareness too. In engaging conversation, make sure you are respectful to other people's choices who want to continue the practice. So make sure you always engage in cultural sensitive conversations with people. It's important. When you want to change people's perceptions and attitudes, you have to be respectful and be mindful as well. Also talk to your kids about FGMC, educate your kids. That's I always make sure I engage my kids at a young age about bodily autonomy and issues that affect them, like FGMC. So talk to your kids about FGMC when they are when they are at the age that you think they understand what some issues, even though they might not deeply understand. But just start with the basics about calling the vagina and what just the little ones, as you cannot just bombard them with everything at once, but just start from the basics. It's important. And also join other survivors, join the movement to end FGMC. Don't stand alone, because together we can end this practice.
Thank you. And Mohammed, same question to you. What advice would you give parents?
So in our context, in our community, I would say that another world is possible. We don't need to do FGMC at all. Also, in the cultural context of the community, there would be many practices which were done earlier, which would be patriarchal, which would be discriminating, but we have stopped doing those. So also look back and see what what is being told to us in the religious or the cultural context, that we should do this, but we are not practicing those. So also look at that. And of course, as both the speakers said, educate, read about it, listen to women's voices, listen to survivors, come together, talk about it, why the practice started, how it is propagated, and how other gender-based discriminations also go hand in hand with FGC in this community. So that would be my advice to parents.
Thank you. Saman, should we do maybe one Q&A question?
We can do. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and I want to leave time for people to take the poll at the end, and we want to share some resources. So if anybody has questions, like real quick, we can address maybe one, and then the rest, I'll connect you with the speakers later on to address them with them. All right, it looks like we may not have any questions, but if you do, please feel free to share them with us later on, and we will try our best to address them. For now, let's take a quick Zoom poll.
Yeah, so if everybody can just take a minute or two to respond to a quick poll about today's webinar, that would be great. Thank you. And thank you so much to the speakers for taking their time to join us for this webinar today and providing such insightful answers. We really appreciate it and are very honored to have had you all here today. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mohammed, Mariana, and Isa too. I feel like this time wasn't sufficient to encompass like all the great information that you all shared and really deeply engaging personal testimonies about your experiences. But we'll definitely have more webinars in the future where we can discuss and expand on our conversation today. All right.
Thank you, Stu. Thank you, Marianne, for sharing all the wonderful stories. You're really inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you, Mohammed, for really working on the role of men. That's a big portion of ending this practice, and we really appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, Isa too. Thanks everyone for joining us today. As we leave here today, we want to share some resources and steps that our audience members can take if they're interested in getting involved in FGMC advocacy. We will share slides with the links to everything in a follow-up email after the webinar. So if you can be on the lookout for that, that would be great. We will link the sales community engagement toolkit for you that you might find helpful on the topic of effectively engaging communities impacted by FGMC. This toolkit offers ethical, trauma-informed, and culturally responsive engagement strategies that are drawn from collective expertise of organizations across the US that are working to address FGMC. And finally, if you'd like to learn more about the Voices to End FGMC storytelling initiative we showcased Mariana Isatu's videos from, we're sharing the links in the chat for you to check out many other digital stories, as well as podcast series launched for more in-depth discussion with some of the storytellers about FGMC. And I believe that's it. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today in what I hope was an engaging discussion on how parents and caregivers are breaking the cycle of FGMC within their homes and communities. Thank you to the panelists for sharing your stories and perspectives with us. And for anybody who still has questions that did not get answered during our panel discussion, be sure to follow us on social media for more answers from our panelists.
Thank you, Samman and the SAYO team for organizing this.
Thanks so much. A shameless plug. I also manage the bio male engagement program here at SAYO. So if anybody is interested in seeing how male engagement is done on FGMC here at SAYO, you can follow us on bio. Let me see if I can share a quick link. And then we have our quarterly meetups where we see how we can engage male members of our community or male identifying members to see how we can do better strategies on anti-FGMC. So you're more than welcome to check this out. All right. Thank you all. Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone.
you.
Bye.
Bye.